There is a form of mental discipline so profound that it transforms not just what you do, but who you are at your very core. And today you will discover the ancient Japanese method that can turn scattered minds into tools of unbreakable focus. Have you ever encountered someone whose presence commands absolute attention, who moves through chaos with the stillness of deep water, whose focus cuts through distraction like a blade through silk, while others frantically juggle 12 tasks and accomplish nothing? This person completes one thing with such intensity that reality itself seems to bend around their will. And when you ask them how they do it, they speak of something most people have never heard of: Ichigyo-Zammai, the practice of becoming one with a single action until the action and the self dissolve into pure presence. This is not meditation as you know it. This is not productivity as the modern world teaches it. This is the deliberate reconstruction of human consciousness itself, passed down through 8 centuries of Zen temples, where monks understood something about the mind that neuroscience is only now beginning to prove. Before I reveal exactly how this ancient system works, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below with the one activity you most want to master completely. This helps me reach more people who are ready for true transformation. Let's begin. The story I'm about to tell you begins with a man named David, a software architect. 34 years old, brilliant mind, successful career, but trapped in a prison of his own making. David lived in the modern disease of scattered attention. His mornings began with checking 3 different phones before his feet touched the floor. Email, social media, news, messages, all flooding his consciousness before he had even chosen to be awake. He would start projects with fierce determination, only to find himself 3 hours later having accomplished nothing meaningful. His browser had 17 tabs open. His mind had perhaps 47 more. The pattern was always the same. Monday morning, complete clarity about his goals. Tuesday afternoon, first negotiations with himself about shortcuts. Wednesday evening, overwhelmed by the complexity of everything he had started but never finished. By Friday, he was already planning to start fresh next week. David had read every productivity book, tried every system, downloaded every app. Nothing worked because he was fighting something he couldn't see: the very architecture of modern consciousness itself. His mind had become like a radio constantly scanning stations, never settling long enough to hear a complete song. He could not read a book for more than 10 minutes without his thoughts drifting. He could not have a conversation without part of his attention planning what to say next. He existed in a state of perpetual mental fragmentation, and every fragment was weak. Until the day he discovered why Zen monks have practiced the same meditation for 1,200 years without their minds wandering even once. And no, it's not willpower. It is something deeper, older, and far more powerful. In the mountains of Japan, there exists a temple where monks rise at 3:30 every morning and perform the same ritual with such precision that their movements seem carved from stone. For 8 centuries, not a single day has passed without this practice. Not during wars, not during earthquakes, not during the deepest winters when snow blocks the mountain paths. The practice continues because these monks understand something about the human mind that the scattered world has forgotten. Ichigyo-Zammai. One practice, complete absorption. This is not multitasking. This is not time management. This is the deliberate dissolution of the divided self into pure, focused presence. When you practice Ichigyo-Zammai, you do not simply focus on one thing, you become one thing. The boundaries between the observer and the observed disappear. There is no mind watching the action. There is only the action itself, flowing through you like water through a riverbed. Shunryu Suzuki, the Zen master who brought this teaching to the West, explained it simply: when you do something, you should do it with your whole body and mind. You should be concentrated on what you do. But concentration here does not mean effort. It means complete surrender to the present activity until the activity performs itself. David discovered this principle not in a temple, but in his own kitchen while making morning tea. Frustrated with another sleepless night of mental spinning, he decided to do one thing with his complete attention. He would make tea and nothing else. No phone, no planning, no thinking about work, just tea. He filled the kettle and listened to the water. He measured the leaves and felt their texture. He watched the steam rise and smelled its clarity. For 7 minutes, there was no David and no tea making. There was only tea happening through a body that had forgotten its name. When he finished, something fundamental had shifted. His mind was not just calm, it was unified. A Harvard neuroscientist who has studied attention for 20 years explains what happens in the brain during single-pointed focus. When you eliminate competing neural pathways, the remaining pathway becomes dramatically more efficient. It's like going from a dim flashlight with dying batteries to a laser that can cut through steel. But knowing about Ichigyo-Zammai and living it are separated by an ocean of internal resistance. David's mind had spent 34 years learning to scatter, and it would not surrender easily. The moment he tried to sustain focus on a single task, every pattern of distraction awakened like a shaken swarm of thoughts. His body craved stimulation. His thoughts demanded variety. His emotions insisted that single focus was boring, limiting, unnatural. The modern mind is addicted to novelty, and like any addiction, it fights recovery with everything it has. David would sit down to write code with complete intention, and within minutes his hand would reach for his phone without his conscious permission. He would begin reading and find himself 3 pages later with no memory of what he had read. This is the battle every serious practitioner must face. Not against external enemies, but against the fragmented patterns living inside their own consciousness. Your mind will tell you that focusing on one thing is inefficient. It will convince you that you're missing important information. It will create emergencies that demand immediate attention. These are not random thoughts. They are the final resistance of the scattered self before transformation. The ancient samurai understood this battle intimately. Miyamoto Musashi wrote, "You must train hard to develop your mind and body. You must be willing to undergo great hardship." He was not speaking about physical training alone. He was describing the willingness to endure the psychological discomfort of forcing a scattered mind to become single-pointed. David learned to recognize the voice of resistance and not obey it. When his mind screamed for variety, he continued with his chosen task. When his body craved stimulation, he breathed through the craving without feeding it. When his emotions labeled the practice as boring, he observed the emotion without believing its story. Slowly, the internal noise began to quiet, not because it disappeared, but because he stopped listening to it. 3 weeks into his practice, David discovered the principle that would transform everything. The ancient masters called it no alternatives. When you truly commit to Ichigyo-Zammai, you eliminate choice from the equation. There is not a menu of possible actions. There is only one action, chosen beforehand, executed without negotiation. David selected one practice, 20 minutes of focused coding every morning at 6 o'clock. Not 19 minutes, not 21, not at 5:59, not at 6:01. 20 minutes at 6 o'clock, regardless of how he felt, what was happening in the world, or what his mind preferred to do instead. This was not a goal. This was not a habit. This was an identity declaration. He was someone who coded for 20 minutes at 6 o'clock every morning. The power of this approach lies in its elimination of decision fatigue. Your mind cannot negotiate with a constant. When there is only one possibility, the internal argument ends. You do not decide whether to practice. You simply practice because practice is what happens at 6 o'clock. A Stanford researcher who studies decision-making explains, every choice you make depletes your willpower reserves. But when you pre-decide your actions, you preserve that energy for execution rather than deliberation. The first week was brutal. David's mind offered him 10,000 reasons why this particular morning was different, why today called for an exception. Week 2, the arguments grew quieter. Week 3, his body began preparing for practice before his conscious mind engaged. By week 4, 6 o'clock arrived, and his fingers were already moving across the keyboard before his awareness had fully awakened. This is the mysterious alchemy of Ichigyo-Zammai. Through complete commitment to one simple practice, you train your entire nervous system to operate from focus rather than fragmentation. The practice becomes stronger than your preferences. But David faced a test that breaks most practitioners before they reach mastery. Life happened. His daughter got sick and he spent the night at the hospital. His internet went down during his practice window. He traveled for work and his schedule exploded. This is where the ancient principle of no gaps becomes crucial. The Zen masters understood something about continuity that modern people have forgotten. A river that stops flowing is no longer a river. It becomes a pond, then a puddle, then dry earth. Your practice is the same. The moment you create a gap, you are no longer practicing. You are someone who used to practice. When David discovered the gap, something inside him broke. Not his spirit, but his illusion that practice could be casual. He was standing in the hospital room, exhausted from watching over his daughter through the night, when 6 o'clock arrived. His mind whispered the familiar excuse. Today is different, you're tired, you deserve a break. Nobody would blame you. But in that moment of negotiation, he remembered something the Zen masters knew about the nature of gaps. They are not neutral spaces. They are not pauses. They are active forces of destruction that unravel everything you have built. The samurai understood this principle in their training with the sword. A blade that sits unused does not simply remain the same. It begins to rust. The edge dulls. The steel weakens. Practice is not maintained by occasional effort. It is maintained by unbroken continuity. David pulled out his phone, opened a simple text editor, and coded for 20 minutes while sitting beside his sleeping daughter. The code was imperfect. The environment was chaotic. But the identity remained intact. He had learned the first law of mastery: presence over perfection, consistency over comfort. A neuroscientist at MIT who studies habit formation explains what happens in the brain during gaps. When you break a behavioral sequence, the neural pathways begin to weaken within hours. The brain interprets repetition as identity and interruption as irrelevance. The ancient warriors knew this instinctively. They practiced their forms in rain, snow, exhaustion, and sickness because they understood that the mind which stops for comfort will stop for anything. David's practice became like breathing, not because it was easy, but because it was non-optional. By the 6th week, David had encountered every excuse his mind could generate. Traffic made him late. His computer crashed. He overslept. He felt sick. He had an emergency call. Each obstacle had once been a practice killer because he faced them without preparation, relying on motivation instead of system. The samurai had a different approach. They called it preparing for the storm while the sky is clear. Every possible obstacle was anticipated, every response predetermined. When rain fell, they trained in rain. When snow blocked the path, they had already decided how to adapt. There was no moment of hesitation, no internal debate, no negotiation with circumstances. David began mapping every potential disruption and creating specific responses. If his daughter woke up early, he would practice in the bathroom with the door closed. If the internet failed, he would code on paper. If he traveled, he would practice in the airport, the hotel room, the airplane. If he felt sick, he would reduce the duration to 5 minutes, but never eliminate it. The power of pre-solutions lies not just in maintaining consistency, but in eliminating the cognitive load of decision-making in critical moments. When your 6-year-old is crying and your coffee machine is broken and you're already running late, your conscious mind cannot be trusted to make great decisions. It will almost always choose the path of least resistance. But when the response is predetermined, the conscious mind is bypassed entirely. The situation arises. The action executes. No debate, no depletion, no gap. A behavioral psychologist at Yale who studies decision fatigue confirms this principle. People who predecide behaviors maintain them exponentially longer than those who rely on motivation. David's preparation became meticulous, surgical. Each excuse was met with a strategy. Each problem was answered before it occurred. His practice adapted fluidly to circumstances but never bowed to them. He had learned what the ancient masters knew: flexibility in method, rigidity in identity. 3 months after beginning his practice, something extraordinary happened. David woke at 5:58 and his hands were already reaching for his laptop before he consciously realized he was awake. His body had learned the ritual so deeply that it initiated itself. He was no longer someone who chose to practice. He was someone incapable of not practicing. This is the threshold few ever cross. The point at which discipline becomes identity, when action no longer requires effort, when willpower becomes irrelevant, when the gap between intention and execution dissolves. His colleagues noticed something they couldn't articulate. He listened completely. He answered efficiently. He delivered work with clarity and speed. Yet he seemed calmer than ever, like pressure couldn't reach him. His code became cleaner, sharper. His mind was no longer scattered. It was one-directional. Ichigyo-Zammai had not just improved David's productivity, it had re-engineered the system generating his thoughts. A Stanford neuroscientist who studies mastery explains, when the brain offloads behavior to automatic networks, the prefrontal cortex quiets. Effort disappears. Identity takes over. David's wife noticed it first. "You're different," she said. "More here, like you're not halfway somewhere else anymore." What she was feeling was presence, the rarest currency in the modern world, because the greatest transformation wasn't what David gained. It was what he lost. The background chatter, the split attention, the constant inner negotiation. And when identity aligns with behavior, resistance dies quietly, not through force, but through irrelevance. People at work started asking what had changed. How had he become so consistent, so focused, so unshakable in his decisions? His answer was always the same. "I stopped trying to be disciplined. I became someone who could not be otherwise." This is the path that awaits you. The ancient method of Ichigyo-Zammai, practiced in mountain temples for 8 centuries, validated by modern neuroscience, demonstrated through David's transformation. You have witnessed how scattered attention becomes unified presence, how fragmented identity becomes unbreakable focus, how the negotiating mind dissolves into automatic action. The choice before you is not about learning a new technique. It is about choosing who you will become. Will you remain someone who tries and fails, who starts and stops, who lives in the exhausting cycle of good intentions and broken promises? Or will you become someone for whom focused action is as natural and inevitable as breathing? The samurai understood that true strength is not measured by what you can do when motivation strikes, but by what you cannot stop doing, even when the world collapses around you. Your transformation does not begin with inspiration, but with a decision. A public declaration of identity. One practice. 20 minutes, same time, every day. No alternatives, no gaps, no negotiation. Because when identity governs behavior, effort becomes optional. When people ask what has changed about you, when they notice the quiet intensity behind your presence, when they wonder how you became so unshakable in your focus, you will know the answer. Ichigyo-Zammai has taken root. Your discipline will unsettle the undisciplined, not because you are better, but because you are proof that more is possible. If this ancient wisdom calls to you, if something in your chest feels like it is waking up, subscribe to this channel and activate notifications so you never miss a lesson. Share this video with someone who needs this. And comment below. What single practice will you give 20 minutes, every day, without fail? What identity will you declare today? Remember, the warrior does not rise through intensity, but through continuity. The mountain temples are still there. The monks still rise before dawn. The practice continues. The only remaining question is simple. Will you join them? Now it's your turn to step onto the path. In the comments below, declare the identity you choose to embody from this day forward. Not a goal, not a plan, an identity. Who do you become when hesitation ends? Write it, seal it, and let this be the first step of your own unbreakable self.